All right, everyone. Welcome to Weather Where You Are. I am First Alert Meteorologist Courteney Jacobazzi. This segment is all about talking about specific weather events, either hyper locally in your community or just something specific to what's going on, and talk about how it could impact where we live here in North Georgia. Now, today, thankfully, the weather that we're going to be talking about is not going to impact us here in North Georgia. But for those of you who maybe were planning on taking a summer vacation, I know a lot of students are out of school, at least I think at least all the students actually now out of school after what was hopefully a wonderful school year. If you were planning on maybe taking a trip down to Florida, this would impact your trip there, as we are watching something brewing in the tropics. Hurricane season officially starts tomorrow, June 1st. We're going to talk about not only what is currently swirling around in the Gulf of Mexico, but we're also going to talk about what the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, say that 5 times fast, what their prediction is for this upcoming hurricane season when it comes to either being overly active, underactive, or just about right, just near average. So stay with us and we'll get you everything you need to know. Here's a look at the tropical update. This is from the National Hurricane Center. Something really cool that the National Hurricane Center is doing this year is that they're not doing 2 and 5 day outlooks. They're actually expanding that to 7 days this year. So you'll see here, this is the chance of development over the next 7 days. And this is a great advancement because this is going to be able to let us see tropical activity and potential tropical development sooner than what we were able to do last year with only the 5 day outlook. So now the National Hurricane Center has just extra eyes on the tropics and is going to be able to give us that really extra early heads up. This is also thanks to just our models generally being better. We have a new hurricane model this year as well. In short, it's called the HAFS model, but the long word of that is a tongue twister, so we're just going to call it HAFS and leave it at that. But it's a hurricane model that has proven to have about 10 to 15% more accuracy than some of our other hurricane models that we've had in years past. So with improving technology, with improving satellites, improving models, we're now able to expand our outlook from the Hurricane Center upwards of 7 days, which is just really, really encouraging news when it comes to preparing you and your families here across the Southeast and here in North Georgia for tropical systems. So right now we're watching a disturbance that is in the Gulf of Mexico swirling around. You see those blues and yellows there popping up on the right side of that X there. Those are thunderstorms that are really starting to burst, and that indicates that the storm is trying to get its act together here. And as well, it's not a storm yet, it's a disturbance, so a cluster of thunderstorms, not an organized storm just yet. But notice the track of that little yellow blob, that's kind of indicating where it could go. Not going to impact us here in North Georgia, but it will bring plenty of rain in the coming days to Florida, really starting today. So what you're looking at is a longer range model here, and see that little white circle around that L there? That is the pressure starting to become a little more organized. You're getting a kind of clear center of circulation there. Definitely doesn't look like this storm has much chance of developing. Once it starts to move inland over Florida and interact with land, it's really not going to have a chance to develop. The thing about tropical systems is this: once the storm itself or the disturbance itself starts to interact with land in any kind of tropical system or any kind of a disturbance that's trying to form into an organized tropical system, that just doesn't go well. Tropical systems in general, whether it's just a disturbance that we're monitoring, a tropical storm or a hurricane, they need warm and moist air, which is obviously the warm body of water of the Gulf of Mexico or the warm body of water that is the Atlantic. They need that to thrive. That water of the ocean, we go through the water cycle. It evaporates, it condenses, and creates that cloud cover that ultimately creates the cloud shield of these storms. And when the form of condensation happens to create these clouds, it creates something called latent heat. That's a really big meteorological term, but all you need to know is that is the energy that these storms thrive on, and that comes from the evaporation of that warm and moist water. So once it goes over land, it loses that ability to create the evaporation process and ultimately that condensation process, which creates the fuel for these storms. So land is kind of like a cut off of a life supply for tropical systems. There's your fancy science lesson for the day. If you were able to follow it, congratulations. I know it can be a little tricky. Tropical systems are tricky, but they're fun to forecast. All right, so as we go through the end of the week, notice how this is going to bring a really rainy pattern to the Florida Peninsula. At least for the next couple of days, it will bring some rainy weather to the Gulf Coast as well, along the Florida Panhandle. So we're talking places like Destin, if you had plans to travel there, Panama City Beach, St. George Island. This would impact you there. But as it moves over the physical peninsula of Florida, so through Tampa, Orlando, maybe even as far south as Miami, again, there's really no exact forecast track on this yet because it is so disorganized. But once it moves off to the Atlantic coast, you'll actually get some drier conditions, it seems like, on the backside of this for the Gulf Coast, at least. Maybe not the entirety of the state. But just again, an early heads up for those of you who might be traveling to Florida. And just an early reminder that hurricane season is upon us. It officially starts tomorrow, June 1st. Here's a look at the names for 2023. If we do have a storm develop, it will be named Arlene. We did actually have a storm that wasn't officially named, but the National Hurricane Center went back and analyzed a storm we had back in January. And so it didn't get the name Arlene, but technically if this turns into a tropical depression, normally it goes in numerical order with TD1 standing for Tropical Depression 1, Tropical Depression 2, and so on. So any tropical depression that forms will actually get the indication of TD2 rather than TD1 because we already technically had a tropical depression back earlier in the year. So there's your fun fact. If you all of a sudden see us going right to 2, you know why. But here's a look at the names. The thing about hurricane names, they will always go female, male name order. We have a couple of Spanish names. We have a couple of French names because of our United States territories and their native languages. So that's another fun fact about the hurricane names. But we'll start with Arlene and we'll go all the way to Whitney. Is your name on the list? Let us know. My name is never going to be on the list. I've looked for the next 10 years. Courtney is not in the rotation, unfortunately. But we do have a couple that we've seen before. We have Cindy. That's one that's definitely been in the rotation in the past few years. Katya, I believe, as well, has been in the rotation in the past few years. Idalia. So definitely some names we've seen before. If a storm is ever so catastrophic that it would bring back kind of dangerous comparison, that gets taken off of the list. Just something to keep in mind. So you will never see an Ian again. You'll never see a Katrina again because of the devastation that it caused. Those names get wiped off the list if they are catastrophic hurricanes. So that's a list of the names for this upcoming season. Here's a look at the forecast. So a little bit of encouraging news. For the first time in a while, we are not being forecast to have an overactive season or an above average season. Now, don't get me wrong, their range does go above average, but when you look at the picture of the National Hurricane Center and NOAA's forecast as a whole, it actually is more so on par with average rather than above average. Their range is definitely shorter than years past. So 12 to 17 named storms, so that's going to go from a tropical storm, that's when a storm gets a name, tropical storm when it has an enclosed center, 39-mile-per-hour winds or greater, and then you have hurricane and major hurricane, which is category 3 or higher. They're forecasting 1 to 4 of those, and 5 to 9 hurricanes with 12 to 17 named storms. So that would be, again, anything from tropical storm all the way to major hurricane is what we're thinking. Of course, we'll be watching this throughout the season. If anything looks to threaten any coast or here in North Georgia, we'll let you know. But something important that I want to note, while this season is potentially going to be near average, if not a little less active than years past because we've been in La Nina for the past 3 years, which usually indicates an above average season. You have a cooler Pacific, you have a warmer Atlantic. The Earth is always trying to maintain a balance. So when you have one ocean on one side, cooler, naturally on the other side, as the Earth tries to maintain that balance, you'll get the warmer ocean on the other side. So this year, we're actually supposed to transition starting in the summer to an El Nino, which usually indicates at least somewhat of a calmer hurricane season. But with that said, we saw it last year with Ian. We had a lot of storms form. A lot of them missed the coast. A lot of them had very little impact. A lot of them stayed out in the Atlantic, but it only took one. It only took one, and that's always the important thing that we like to say, whether we're looking ahead to an above average season or an overly active season, or we're predicting an average season or even a below average season numbers wise. It only takes one storm to cause some crazy damage. So we just want to say, even though the forecast is looking a little less active than in years past, at least that's what NOAA is forecasting, it's really important to stay tuned to the forecast as we go through hurricane season and as we start to see things develop. All right, everyone, thanks so much for spending time with us today. Hopefully you learned something new here on Weather Where You Are, and we'll catch you next time.